Story. We cross now live to our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. A very good evening to you, Sherwin. Following Nancy Pelosi's announcement of an impeachment inquiry, the White House has now released the transcript of U.S. President Donald Trump's call with his Ukrainian counterpart. Does this provide further clarity on what was said on that call?
Absolutely does, Nsinga. And to quote the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, a short time ago, he said that it's far more damning than expected. Now, I just want to read you a portion of that transcript between President Trump and President Zelensky of the Ukraine. There's a part of this where the president of Ukraine says, quote, "I would like also to thank you for your great support in the area of defense. We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next step. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins." This is a type of weapon sold to Ukraine by the United States, from the United States for defense purposes. The response from President Trump: "I would like you to do us a favor." This is immediately after the request for more weapons. Quoting the President of the United States, "I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it." And then they sort of segue into this conversation where the president is pressuring Zelensky to investigate or reopen an investigation that has subsequently been closed into the former vice president, of former President Barack Obama, Joe Biden. Joe Biden's son sat on the board of an energy company in Ukraine. There's some allegations being made by the Trump administration and a number of his aides that there's some sort of corruption as it relates to the Bidens. There's been no evidence presented, and really following the request for more weapons, sort of segueing into this talk about the Bidens and the need for a further investigation. This is what the Democrats feel is a violation of the president's constitutional responsibilities. They believe it is a crime in terms of electoral law in this country, because Joe Biden is currently the front runner among a host of Democrats running to face Donald Trump, the Republican president and the incumbent in the presidential elections next year. So this could be a campaign finance violation in terms of the Electoral Act in this country. And this is what essentially has broken the levee. Remember, Nancy Pelosi was not the eager beaver that wanted to pursue this impeachment inquiry against the President of the United States. She recognized that this was something that was going to divide the country. At this point, Nsinga, a majority of Americans don't actually want the impeachment proceedings to go ahead, but this is a competing notion between the political responsibilities that Nancy Pelosi might have vis-a-vis winning the election in 2020 and her constitutional responsibilities as the Speaker of the House. She is now going with that constitutional avenue and instructed the 6 committees of the House of Representatives, among them the Judiciary that is currently a committee that is currently dealing with the Mueller report, the Intelligence Committee that is also dealing with the Mueller report, specifically Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Those committees now are going to be operating under an umbrella known as an impeachment inquiry that will eventually lead to a vote in the House to determine whether an actual impeachment inquiry will move ahead to the Senate.
How has President Trump responded to the impeachment announcement, and perhaps explain how this process might unfold? Let's listen.
We are in consultations with our friends and allies about the next steps to take. We saw the statement that came out of the E3 countries on Monday, which was a very strong statement. We believe that we have also launched an investigation to establish the source from which the missiles and the drones were launched. The initial investigation results prove that these were Iranian weapons, so we hold Iran responsible for this.
Showing, of course, that not being U.S. President Donald Trump, but we know that while there is this issue of Donald Trump and his impeachment at the UN General Assembly, the issue of the Middle East is playing out. There's been a big emphasis on the Gulf region today. So, of course, there was those attacks on the infrastructure of Saudi Arabia, with both the kingdom and the United States blaming Iran. Saudi's foreign minister speaking there at the UN a short time ago Do we know what the investigation appears to be saying about which direction in particular it's going? And also, is there a greater role for the Security Council?
Okay, so there are two questions there. Let me deal first with the Trump response to the impeachment inquiry. He is firing off a number of tweets in Singa, clearly an irritated president while he is engaging here in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly with a number of heads of state. As you correctly pointed out, he is going to meet with his Ukrainian counterpart today. So to be a fly on the wall of that conversation, a number of tweets I can read to you from the president. There has been no president in the history of our country who has been treated so badly as I have. The Democrats are frozen with hatred and fear. They get nothing done. This should never have allowed to happen and has never happened to another president. This is a witch hunt. He's called it a manufactured crisis. Of course, the Democrats have a different perspective, but as we have been reporting all day, the president is due to speak here in New York to a gathering of the reporters. He's doing a broad-ranging press conference at 1600 hours local time. That's around 10 p.m. And so while the focus was meant to be on the UN General Assembly, we imagine that press conference will be dominated by the announcement by Nancy Pelosi of that impeachment inquiry. In addition, there are many issues that are being grappled with here at the United Nations, including, as we were hearing in that clip from the Saudi foreign minister, he was responding in Singa to a question from a reporter as to what next steps they were going to take as it relates to accusations that Iran was responsible for an attack on Saudi oil infrastructure a few weeks ago. The Saudi foreign minister in that clip responding, saying that they are conducting an investigation and have invited UN experts to accompany their investigators into this probe, but that preliminary findings from their own investigations point to Iran. But what we are seeing is a lowering of the rhetoric, certainly from the Saudis and the United States president. When this incident happened, by the next day they were accusing the Iranians, but we haven't seen this matter brought to the UN Security Council. We imagine that once there is something in definitive in terms of the UN investigation accompanying the local investigation in Saudi Arabia, that this evidence will be presented to the UN Security Council. But of course, Iran and Tehran have denied any responsibility. The Houthis, the rebel group fighting the Saudi-led alliance in Yemen, has claimed responsibility for this attack. So it's very difficult for us as journalists who sit here in New York to sort of pass through the details, because it's the he said, she said scenario at this stage. So once those investigations are complete, I think we'll be able to have something more definitive that might eventually come to the UN Security Council.
Okay, Sherwin, let's stay with that. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani spoke in the General Assembly earlier, while foreign ministers to the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, met to try and salvage the multilateral agreement that the United States left a year ago. What's the latest there?
Well, as you correctly point out, there was a speech delivered by the Iranian President Rouhani in the General Assembly today. Of course, this comes with that backdrop of the tensions in the Gulf. The Iranians are now talking about a regional non-aggression pact that they want the United Nations to place under an umbrella of the United Nations, so that there's an agreement between states like Iran and Saudi Arabia in particular, but joined by other regional countries, to agree that they will not attack each other, as we saw with the Saudi attack on oil infrastructure a number of weeks ago. Let's listen to what the Iranian president had to say in the General Assembly, followed by the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, who was speaking right after a ministerial meeting of the parties to that JCPOA agreement.
On behalf of my nation and state, I would like to announce that our response to any negotiation under sanctions is negative. The government and people of Iran have remained steadfast against the harshest sanctions in the past 1.5 years, and will never negotiate with an enemy that seeks to make Iran surrender with the weapon of poverty, pressure, and sanctions. If you require a positive answer, and as declared by the leader of the Islamic Revolution, The only way for talks to begin is to return to commitments and compliance. If you are sensitive to the name of JCPOA, well, then you can return to its framework and abide by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. Stop the sanctions so as to open the way for the start of negotiations.
Participants recalled that the JCPOA, as endorsed by the UN Security Council Resolution 2231 of 2015, remains a key element of the global nuclear non-proliferation architecture and a significant achievement of multilateral diplomacy. They underlined the importance of the full and effective implementation of the JCPOA by all sides and confirmed their determination to continue all efforts to preserve the agreement, which is in the interests of all.
So essentially what we're seeing here in Singa are two tracks, right? The United States has applied its maximum pressure campaign, reinstituting stiff sanctions, including on Iran's central bank just this week, trying to bring them back to the negotiating table to renegotiate essentially what is a multilateral agreement between a number of nations and endorsed by the UN Security Council, wanting them to renegotiate a different deal. The Iranians are saying not a chance of that happening. Essentially, they feel the United States has lost credibility. I attended a breakfast earlier this week with Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif, and he made the point that the United States has lost all credibility because while administrations will change, agreements signed by previous administrations still hold, particularly those that have been endorsed by the UN Security Council, which essentially makes them international law. So what the Iranians are saying, the United States needs to come back to the JCPOA before negotiations, before a new diplomatic track can be developed. And until that, as you heard from the Iranian president, that's a non-starter.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease giving us a comprehensive update on world affairs live from New York there. Thanks so much for your time this evening.